Arizona is famous for its deserts, canyons, and vast landscapes, yet hidden among the red rocks and pine forests lie secrets darker than any shadow. Visitors have reported chilling whispers carried by the wind, footsteps echoing along empty trails, and ghostly figures appearing among the cliffs. Some say the parks themselves remember tragedy, accidents, and the restless spirits of those who vanished or met untimely ends. Tonight, we will explore the 20 most haunted national parks in Arizona, where the past never rests and the night carries stories of fear and loss. If you heard your name called by a spectral voice from a desert canyon, would you investigate, or would you retreat into the safety of the light? Hello, my dear friend. I hope you are safe tonight, because the parks we are about to explore are not for the faint of heart. Arizona's national parks are home to beauty, wildlife, and history, but beneath their splendor lurks an invisible layer of sorrow and unrest. Visitors have reported sudden chills along desert trails, figures standing silently at cliff edges, and lights flickering in abandoned cabins or ranger stations. Some say the wind carries whispers of travelers long gone, and the cliffs themselves seem to watch intruders with unseen eyes. Before we step into the first haunted park, consider this: if a shadowy figure emerged from the canyon mist and beckoned you forward, would you follow it, or would you turn back while you still could? Take a deep breath, my friend, and let us journey into the 20 most haunted national parks in Arizona. Grand Canyon National Park stretches across the Arizona landscape, a vast expanse of rock, sky, and shadow that draws travelers from around the world. By day, the canyon is breathtaking, sunlight illuminating ridges, cliffs, and crevices in colors that shift from gold to crimson to deep violet. The roar of the Colorado River echoes faintly from the depths, while the wind stirs across the rim and through the juniper and pine. Hikers and sightseers move along trails, pausing to marvel at the scale and grandeur of this natural wonder. Yet as daylight fades and the sun dips below the horizon, the canyon transforms. Shadows deepen, the air cools, and the landscape takes on an eerie, almost otherworldly quality. Visitors report shadowy figures along cliff edges. They appear briefly in the corner of vision, tall and still, as if watching the canyon itself. Approaching these shapes often yields only emptiness, leaving behind the sensation that something observed remains present even when unseen. The cliffs and plateaus seem to carry memory, storing impressions of movement and presence that linger long after hikers have passed. The figures are fleeting but powerful, a reminder that the canyon is a space where perception is heightened and every glance may reveal more than meets the eye. Hikers often hear faint footsteps behind them along deserted trails. The sound is soft at first, a rhythm that mirrors their own steps, then falls away abruptly as if receding into the landscape. Attempts to locate the source yield no explanation. Yet the sensation persists, pressing lightly against awareness. Footfalls echo differently across rock, sand, and soil, creating the illusion of companions or watchers, and reinforcing the idea that the canyon holds more than its physical dimensions. The quiet amplifies every sound, transforming ordinary travel into an immersive sensory experience. Lanterns are sometimes seen flickering along empty trails where no one walks. Their light is dim and wavering, casting long, shifting shadows across rocks and scrub. Observers describe them as moving, appearing and vanishing without pattern, sometimes visible from a distance, sometimes close enough to illuminate the path ahead. The glow adds an element of mystery, highlighting natural textures while suggesting the presence of life, or something approaching life, within the otherwise deserted landscape. Each flicker draws attention, heightening awareness of the canyon's contours, depth, and the interplay of light and darkness. The glow adds an element of mystery, highlighting natural textures while suggesting the presence of life, or something approaching life, within the otherwise deserted landscape. Figures are occasionally observed standing silently on the plateau, gazing into the abyss. Their stillness is striking against the vast, open landscape, creating a sense of focus and intensity that is both unsettling and awe-inspiring. These silhouettes blend with shadows and ambient light, challenging perception and encouraging observers to question what is real, imagined, or remembered. The canyon itself seems to hold them there, bound to its edges by the weight of memory and the sweep of time. The topography of the canyon shapes experience. Cliffs, ridges, and crevices create pathways of light and shadow, guiding vision and perception. Trails wind along ridges, descend into side canyons, and traverse plateaus where every step requires attention. Rocks reflect and absorb light differently depending on time of day, angle, and moisture, creating shifting patterns that can suggest movement or form. The scale of the landscape amplifies subtle cues, from distant sounds to the flicker of a shadow, immersing visitors in both space and atmosphere. Wind and temperature contribute to the ambience. Gusts sweep across ridges, rustling vegetation and carrying faint distant sounds, while pockets of cooler air gather along cliff faces and in recesses. These subtle variations in sensation enhance awareness of environment and encourage careful observation. Every shift in wind, light, or temperature interacts with sound and shadow to form a cohesive, multisensory experience that engages body, mind, and perception. The canyon soundscape is rich and layered. The Colorado River whispers from below, carrying distant echoes across ridges. Wind threads through juniper, pine, and scrub, producing a soft, shifting tone. Against this natural backdrop, footsteps, whispers, and the occasional faint murmur of movement add depth and resonance. Silence is never absolute, and each sound becomes part of an ongoing dialogue between observer and landscape, reinforcing the sense that the canyon is alive with memory and subtle presence. Time within the canyon feels altered after dusk. Minutes expand when observing shadows, listening to sound, and noticing movement. While hours can pass unnoticed amid the vast scale of cliffs and plateaus. The rhythm of natural phenomena, the ebb of light, the rustle of wind, the shifting tide of Shidausa, creates an immersive experience where past and present merge. Observers find themselves attuned to detail, moving slowly, listening carefully, and noticing the subtle interplay of perception and environment. Memory of Grand Canyon National Park persists long after leaving. Shadowy figures, flickering lanterns, faint footsteps, and the still presence of watchers remain vivid in recollection. Visitors carry these impressions forward, integrating them into awareness of landscapes and natural spaces elsewhere. The canyon leaves an enduring mark, a place where scale, shadow, and sound combine with perception to create an experience that is both breathtaking and haunting, a space where beauty and subtle mystery coexist in every ridge, dune, and plateau. Grand Canyon National Park endures as both natural wonder and repository of experience. Its cliffs, plateaus, ridges, and trails interact with light, shadow, sound, and perception to create a fully immersive environment. Figures, whispers, and ghostly lights converge to shape awareness and attention. Visitors encounter not only geological grandeur but an environment alive with memory, presence, and the subtle persistence of the unseen, leaving a lasting impression of scale, depth, and the quiet resonance of centuries within its vast expanse. Petrified Forest National Park stretches across an ancient landscape, where the remains of once mighty trees lie turned to stone, their textures frozen in time. The land is wide and open, dotted with fossilized trunks that jut from the earth at odd angles, their surfaces polished by centuries of wind and sun. The desert air carries a dry, mineral scent, tinged with dust and the faint tang of forgotten storms. Even in broad daylight, the place feels suspended, timeless and silent. Yet under the stillness lingers an energy that is hard to define. Figures are sometimes seen moving among the petrified wood. They blend with the shadows of the fossilized trunks, appearing almost part of the stone itself. Approaching them often reveals nothing tangible, leaving only a lingering impression of presence. Their movements are deliberate yet ephemeral, creating the sense that the forest holds memory. Creating the sense that the forest holds memory and that some spirits continue to walk among the petrified remains. Whispers rise unexpectedly in the open desert air. Soft and intermittent, they seem to come from nowhere and everywhere, drifting along trails and around fossilized trunks. Names are sometimes carried on the wind, calling to visitors with a gentle insistence. The sounds are faint but persistent, blending with the natural rustle of sand, wind, and stone, producing an immersive experience that draws attention to every subtle shift in the environment. Observers often feel a subtle chill or a pressure in the air as the voices move, enhancing the sensation of unseen presence. Distant voices echo along abandoned trails, their origins impossible to pinpoint. Some describe conversations in tones that are urgent yet hushed, blending with the ambient sound of wind through petrified logs and the uneven terrain. The effect is haunting, as though the park itself preserves the traces of those who traveled these lands long ago. Every footstep along the trail seems amplified, every movement of dust or stone carrying significance within this layered landscape. The petrified trunks themselves create an eerie rhythm to the terrain. Their shapes cast long shadows in the sun and moonlight, forming patterns that shift with perspective. Observers report that these shadows occasionally seem to stretch or bend beyond expectation, hinting at forms moving within or alongside them. The interplay of light, stone, and shadow produces moments where the forest feels simultaneously solid and alive, where shapes appear to flicker at the edge of perception before dissolving into the landscape. Visitors on the trails often experience sudden changes in perception. Distances seem to stretch or compress, and ordinary visual cues appear altered by the angle of light and the contours of stone. Every log, every crevice, every outline of fossilized bark gains prominence, making movement and observation more deliberate. Travelers describe a heightened sensitivity to sound, noticing distant footsteps, shifting sand, or faint murmurs that would otherwise go unnoticed, creating a sense of continuous attention and presence. The open desert amplifies the natural sounds of the park. Wind whistles across rocks and logs. Dust shifts over sandy stretches, and the faint movement of wildlife carries easily across trails. Layered atop these environmental noises are the whispers, footsteps, and distant voices, forming a complex auditory landscape that seems to interact with the observer. Every sound is meaningful, every echo carrying the sense of history and ongoing observation within the park. Even ghostly travelers are reported along the trails. They appear at varying distances, walking slowly, sometimes alone, sometimes in faint groups. Their forms are subtle, blending with the shapes of petrified trees and the shadows of the desert. Observers describe a feeling of being followed or accompanied, though the figures remain distant and intangible. Their passage leaves a lingering sense of movement and presence, an impression that the park itself is replaying fragments of past journeys. The effect of time in the petrified forest is altered. Moments stretch, perception of distance shifts, and familiar paths can seem unfamiliar. Figures that appear, whispers that rise and fade, and the shifting patterns of light and shadow combine to create a fully immersive environment. The landscape itself seems alive, preserving memory, observation, and echoes of life that existed long before the park became a place for visitors to walk. Even brief visits leave lasting impressions. The shapes of petrified trunks, the whispers on abandoned trails, the distant voices, and the ghostly travelers embed themselves in memory. Observers often recall the textures of stone, the patterns of shadow, and the subtle movements of forms that seemed alive. Replay these experiences in dreams or sudden recollections. The park leaves a quiet, persistent awareness of presence and history that lingers long after departure. The park leaves a quiet, persistent awareness of presence and history that lingers long after departure. Observers often recall the textures of stone, and the patterns of shadow, and the subtle movements of forms that seemed alive. Replay these experiences in dreams or sudden recollections. The park leaves a quiet, persistent awareness of presence and history. Petrified Forest National Park endures as a place where memory, landscape, and subtle energy converge. Its fossilized trees, open desert, and abandoned trails carry traces of the past while interacting with the present. Figures appear, whispers drift, shadows move, and distant voices echo, creating an environment that is immersive, alive, and timeless. To walk among the petrified trunks is to enter a world where ordinary perception is suspended, where history is present, and where the spirits of those who traveled these lands long ago continue to observe, guide, and linger across the sands and stone of the ancient forest. Saguaro National Park stretches across the desert with vast expanses of sand, rocky terrain, and towering cacti that rise like sentinels into the sky. By day, the park is alive with sunlight, the green of the cacti vibrant against the earthy desert floor, and the hum of wildlife filling the air. But as night falls, the landscape transforms. Shadows lengthen and stretch across the sand, twisting around the cacti in shapes that seem almost deliberate. The desert grows quiet, yet a sense of presence lingers in every curve of the land and every silhouette cast by the giants of the arid landscape. Figures are sometimes seen moving between the cacti. Their forms are human-like but indistinct, gliding silently along paths that wind through the desert. Observers describe them as fleeting, appearing and vanishing in the blink of an eye. They do not interact with visitors, yet their presence is unmistakable, creating an impression of life amidst the stillness. Approaching them causes the figures to dissolve into darkness or merge with the shadowed shapes of the cacti, leaving empty spaces and a lingering sense of observation. Cold drafts sweep across the desert floor, brief and concentrated, brushing over skin in ways that feel almost tactile. The chill contrasts with the warmth retained in the sand from the day, creating an uncanny awareness in those who walk the park at night. Travelers describe the sensation as moving with them, following along trails or across open areas between cacti, reinforcing the perception of unseen presence. Every step becomes deliberate, every glance heightened by the desert's silent watchfulness. Whispers drift across the sand, faint and irregular, carried lightly on the wind. Words are indistinct, sometimes forming names, sometimes phrases that fade before they can be understood. Observers note that the sound seems to come from multiple directions at once, moving through the cacti as if the desert itself is speaking. The whispers are subtle yet persistent, drawing attention to the contours of the land and amplifying the feeling that the park is alive with memory and unseen life. The cacti themselves create a landscape of shifting perception. Tall and imposing, their arms cast long, eerie shadows that stretch across sand and rocks. Shapes emerge in their forms that resemble faces or figures, fleeting and ephemeral. Travelers often pause, squinting against the desert darkness, seeing features that vanish with a blink or a shift in perspective. The effect is disorienting, blending natural structure with subtle suggestion, leaving observers uncertain where reality ends and perception begins. The desert floor amplifies every movement and sound. Sand crunches underfoot echoing against rocks and low ridges. Wind whistles through gaps between cacti. Even the smallest noise seems magnified, carrying through empty spaces where no one else walks. Figures moving between the cacti appear and vanish in sequence with shadows and moonlight, creating an immersive experience where sight, sound and awareness are inextricably linked. Time in Saguaro National Park feels altered at night. Moments stretch, shadows linger longer than expected, and echoes of distant movement seem to resonate across vast spaces. Figures appear, dissolve, and reappear in patterns that feel deliberate yet unpredictable. Whispers move with the wind, and cold drafts sweep through trails, heightening the perception of the desert as a living, observing entity. Every step, every glance, every pause carries significance in the quiet expanse of the park. Even brief encounters leave lasting impressions. Figures glimpsed between cacti. Whispers drifting across sand. Fleeting shapes in moonlight. And sudden chills imprint themselves on memory. Each interaction with shadow and light reinforces the layered nature of the experience, leaving travelers with a quiet sense of immersion long after departing the park. The natural features of Saguaro National Park heighten the haunting atmosphere. Dunes rise and fall along trails, rocks catch moonlight in shifting patterns. And the cacti themselves form barriers that create pockets of shadow and perception. Figures appear unexpectedly in these areas. Faces emerge in the silhouettes of the giants, and echoes of movement travel unpredictably across open spaces. Every contour, every surface, and every shadow. Figures between the cacti move with purpose yet remain elusive. Observers note their deliberate pacing, the moments of pause, and the sudden disappearance. Faces that emerge in shapes of cacti are momentary, leaving only the suggestion of recognition before dissolving into shadow. Whispers and cold drafts accompany movement, creating a continuous sense of presence and observation. Travelers become acutely aware of light, sound, and space, experiencing the park as a layered environment that blends history, perception, and sensation. Saguaro National Park exists as a place where memory, perception, and environment converge. Figures glide silently between cacti, cold drafts sweep along trails, whispers drift across sand. And fleeting faces appear in the shapes of the giants. The desert does not threaten but observes and preserves, engaging visitors in an experience that is immersive and enduring. Every glance, every step, every echo becomes part of the interaction, leaving a lasting impression that is both subtle and unforgettable. At night, Saguaro National Park is most alive. Figures move between towering cacti. Shadows twist and stretch across sand and rock. Whispers drift with the wind. Cold drafts brush skin. Faces emerge momentarily in the forms of cacti, disappearing as the observer blinks. Whispers drift with the wind, cold drafts brush skin, shadows twist and stretch across sand and rock. Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park stretches across the desert, a vast expanse of red sandstone buttes and mesas that rise dramatically from the sandy floor. By day, the sunlight illuminates the rugged landscape, casting shadows that accentuate every ridge and crevice. Yet as dusk settles, the valley transforms. The reds deepen to rust and maroon, the shadows lengthen, and a quiet energy seems to settle over the rocks, a presence that has persisted for centuries. Spectral figures are sometimes glimpsed among the sandstone formations. Observers describe pale outlines moving along ridges, disappearing into the rock faces, or lingering briefly near isolated mesas. The movements are deliberate and silent, a pacing that suggests purpose. Travelers report the sensation of being watched, a subtle awareness of figures that occupy spaces unseen yet undeniably present. Distant drums and chants carry across the valley, often without visible source. The sounds are faint yet rhythmic, echoing across the open desert and bouncing off sandstone walls. The music and chanting are not loud but resonate clearly, creating an immersive auditory landscape that heightens the feeling of connection with the history embedded in the rocks. Observers often feel drawn toward the source, though no one is present. Shadowy forms traverse the valley floor, moving along trails between buttes and across the desert sands. They appear and vanish without warning, sometimes glimpsed along the tops of ridges where the last light of day strikes. Their movement is fluid yet purposeful, tracing pathways that seem older than the memory of modern travelers. The forms are fleeting, leaving a lingering impression that the valley itself is alive with presence. Many claim that the spirits of ancient warriors remain among the rocks. Observers speak of figures that carry themselves with a quiet dignity, as if guarding the landscape or walking in ceremonial rhythm. The perception is subtle, often revealed through peripheral vision or glimpses between formations. These presences evoke reverence rather than fear, a sense that the valley is both guardian and witness to history. The interplay of light and shadow in Monument Valley enhances the experience. As the sun dips toward the horizon, buttes and mesas cast long, shifting shadows that stretch across the desert floor. The colors deepen, and shapes appear to move in the low light, creating the impression that the landscape itself is attentive. Observers report that shadows sometimes take on humanoid forms, lingering at the edges of vision before dissolving into the rocks. The valley's open spaces amplify sound in remarkable ways. A single footstep, the rustle of sand, or the whisper of wind through sparse vegetation, resonates across the desert, blending with the faint echoes of drums and chants. The auditory layering makes every step and movement significant, producing a heightened awareness that engages multiple senses simultaneously. Travelers describe a feeling of being present within a living, breathing environment that is both vast and intimate. Cliffs and ridges offer unexpected vantage points. From higher ground, shadows appear to shift along trails below, forming patterns that are difficult to trace. Observers report that figures sometimes appear at different locations in rapid succession, creating a sense of motion that is inconsistent with the natural landscape. The combination of spatial awareness, shifting light, and spectral forms contributes to a profound sense of presence and history intertwined. Time seems altered in the valley at dusk. Moments stretch, figures reappear, and sounds repeat or echo across distances. The effect is subtle yet immersive, producing a sense that the observer is sharing space with layers of history, memory, and presence. The rhythm of the deserta, the wind, the shifting light, the distant drumset creates a cadence that is both calming and haunting, drawing attention to every subtle change in the environment. Observers report heightened awareness of their own movement within the valley. Shadows stretch beneath feet, wind brushes across the skin unexpectedly, and distant figures seem to respond to shifts in position. The environment appears reactive, as though the sandstone formations themselves retain memory and carry the imprints of those who have traversed the landscape for centuries. Even as night falls and stars emerge over the desert, the presence remains. Figures may still appear along ridges. Faint music and chanting continue to drift across the valley, and shadows hold the outlines of movement. The combination of visual, auditory, and tactile perception creates an immersive experience, where the desert is both vast and filled with attentive presence. Travelers often leave Monument Valley with an enduring impression. The spectral figures, drifting shadows, distant drums, and whispered chants linger in memory, creating a layered experience of history and presence. The valley is not threatening, it does not chase or disturb. It simply exists as a living landscape where past and present coexist, and where the spirits of those who walked before continue to occupy the space with dignity and quiet purpose. Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park endures as a place where natural beauty, history, and subtle phenomena converge. Red sandstone buttes, shadowy forms, distant music, and spectral figures create an atmosphere that is immersive, mysterious, and unforgettable. Visitors experience not only the physical landscape but also the lingering presence of those who came before, a testament to history, memory, and the quiet power of a land alive with echoes of the past. Canyon de Chelly National Monument stretches across the Arizona landscape. A vast expanse of towering sandstone cliffs. Sunlight casts long shadows along the canyon walls, highlighting the textures of rock and the delicate patterns of erosion. A stillness that is both awe-inspiring and humbling. A quiet weight that suggests centuries of human presence. Memory and resilience. Centuries of human presence, memory, and resilience. Figures are sometimes glimpsed along cliff sides, standing or moving slowly, their outlines faint against the sunlit rock. They watch silently, appearing and vanishing without warning. Observers describe a sense of attention from these forms, as though the canyon itself preserves and reflects the memory of those who once lived here. The figures are not threatening, yet their presence is unmistakable, drawing focus and heightening awareness of both space and history. Footsteps echo along trails and near ancient dwellings, crisp and deliberate against the stone and sand. The sound seems to come from multiple directions, sometimes preceding the observer and other times trailing behind. Visitors report that no one is present, yet the echoes are distinct, carrying a sense of rhythm and intention. These auditory cues blend seamlessly with natural sounds, wind through canyon walls, distant birds, and the gentle rush of water from seasonal streams. Faint singing sometimes drifts from the ancient dwellings, a melodic whisper that seems to resonate from within the rock itself. The tone is soft but persistent, rising and fading in irregular patterns. Observers often feel compelled to pause and listen, aware that the sound is not just an echo but an expression of memory preserved within the structures. The combination of music, footsteps, and the canyon's natural acoustics creates an immersive experience, blending past and present into a continuous sensory landscape. The wind carries more than sound. Visitors report hearing voices, names, warnings, fragments of speech that seem to travel along the canyon walls, curling through crevices and alcoves. The effect is subtle yet persistent, evoking the presence of countless generations who have lived, worked, and prayed here. Each gust brings new layers of perception, reminding observers that the canyon is not only a physical space but also a repository of memory and attention. Cliff dwellings and ledges contribute to the layered perception of presence. Figures are often observed moving near cliff edges, sometimes standing still as though observing the valley below. Other times gliding along narrow paths carved into the rock. Shadows shift and elongate, interacting with light to form shapes that appear animate. Observers feel a rhythm in these movements, a cadence that seems guided by memory and history rather than ordinary motion. The canyon floor is equally resonant. Paths wind between natural formations and human-made structures, offering vantage points that reveal both scale and perspective. Footfalls seem amplified, echoing along walls and across alcoves, while distant sounds appear close, drawing attention to spatial relationships that are both physical and perceptual. The combination of height, depth, and open space enhances the impression that the canyon itself is alive with observation and memory. Time behaves differently within the canyon. Moments stretch or compress unpredictably as shadows shift, wind carries voices across unexpected paths, and figures appear or vanish in irregular patterns. Visitors report a heightened awareness, perceiving nuances of light, sound, and movement that are easily overlooked elsewhere. The interplay of environmental cues with memory and presence creates a fully immersive experience, engaging both senses and intuition. Natural elements reinforce the perception of memory and attention. Sunlight moves across canyon walls, illuminating alcoves and ledges where figures are glimpsed. Water flowing from seasonal streams creates reflections that animate the stone, blending with shadows to suggest movement. Even dust and sand lifted by the wind contribute to subtle visual patterns, reinforcing the sense of continuity and layered presence throughout the canyon. Departing Canyon de Chelly leaves a lasting impression. Figures fade from view, footsteps and singing dissipate, and voices carried by the wind grow distant. Yet the memory of presence endures, lingering in thought and awareness. Visitors often report an ongoing sense of observation, a feeling that the canyon continues to hold and preserve the attention of those who came before. The landscape, the cliff dwellings, the wind, and the echoes all remain vivid in memory, a testament to the enduring resonance of place. Ultimately, Canyon de Chelly National Monument is more than a geological wonder. It is an environment where memory, perception, and presence converge. Figures along cliff edges, echoes of footsteps, faint singing, and voices carried by the wind create a layered and immersive experience. Every visit becomes an exploration of attention, observation, and history, leaving a vivid impression of a canyon that remembers, observes, and endures across centuries, preserving the lives and stories of those who shaped its walls. Chiricahua National Monument rises from the desert landscape like a cathedral of stone, a vast collection of rock spires, cliffs, and formations shaped over millennia by wind and water. By day, sunlight illuminates the rugged terrain, casting intricate patterns across pinnacles, canyons, and talus slopes. Shadows stretch and twist across crevices and ledges, emphasizing the texture and scale of the formations. The area is alive with the sound of wind through juniper and pine, the distant call of birds, and the shifting of loose stone beneath Haikursa feet. Yet as twilight approaches, the monument transforms. Shadows deepen, the wind carries a subtle change in tone, and the spires seem to take on a presence of their own. Visitors report seeing figures moving among the rocks. They appear at the edges of vision, slipping between pinnacles, ascending narrow paths, or pausing on ledges. Approaching them often yields nothing, yet the impression of movement lingers, a subtle awareness that the land itself preserves the memory of those who walked it before. The figures are elusive, blending with shadows and textures of stone, yet unmistakably present. They evoke a sense of history, continuity, and the quiet persistence of presence in a landscape that feels alive with both form and memory. Cold spots appear unpredictably along trails and among formations. A sudden drop in temperature may brush against the skin, chilling and yet brief. Often coinciding with glimpses of figures or shifts in shadow. The sensation heightens awareness, drawing attention to the environment, the contours of rock, and the play of light. Observers note that the cold seems localized, as if the air itself carries a memory of movement or presence that persists independently of external conditions. Whispers echo through the stone formations, faint and indistinct, carried along narrow corridors and open spaces alike. They are soft murmurs, sometimes resembling words or fragments of speech, other times mere tonal variations that suggest communication. The whispers appear to move with the observer, shifting in direction and intensity, creating a sense of being observed or guided through the labyrinth of rock. This auditory presence complements the visual impressions of figures, combining to form an immersive experience of perception and atmosphere. The spires themselves enhance the sense of life within the landscape. Towers of rock rise sharply, their surfaces etched with centuries of erosion and weathering. Light and shadow play across these surfaces, changing with the position of the sun or the moon, creating the illusion of motion even when still. Narrow passages and ledges form natural corridors, guiding perception while offering unexpected glimpses of movement or reflection. Each formation acts as both canvas and participant, interacting with light, sound, and the observer to create an environment charged with energy and history. Time in Chiricahua National Monument feels suspended at twilight. Minutes stretch as visitors observe subtle changes in shadow, the movement of figures, or shifts in sound. Hours can pass unnoticed amid the intricate play of light and the rhythm of wind across pinnacles and canyons. Attention becomes deliberate, observation continuous, and every step taken is measured. As if the landscape itself requires engagement to reveal its layers of memory and presence. Cliff ledges offer some of the most striking encounters. Figures are occasionally seen standing on high points, silhouetted against fading light, gazing across valleys and distant formations. They remain motionless for moments that seem to stretch, then vanish when approached, leaving only the sensation of being observed from above. The ledges themselves emphasize scale and perspective, creating both awe and subtle tension as shadows, figures, and stone interact in ways that challenge perception. Sound plays a central role in shaping experience. The wind whistles through spires, rustles dry grasses, and carries distant calls across valleys. Footsteps echo differently depending on trail surfaces, amplifying each movement. Whispers, soft creaks, and subtle shifts in rock interact with natural sounds to form a layered auditory landscape. Silence is never absolute. Every element contributes to the perception that the monument is alive with memory and attentive presence. Light shifts dramatically at dusk. The sun lowers, casting long shadows and accentuating textures, cracks, and edges in the rock. Moonlight creates pools of silver along ledges and open spaces, softening forms and blending them with surrounding darkness. Lantern-like glows, whether imagined or fleetingly seen, highlight cracks and passageways, adding to the sense of subtle motion. These variations in light transform familiar trails and formations into a dynamic and immersive visual experience, encouraging heightened attention and careful observation. Memory of Chiricahua National Monument endures long after leaving. Figures glimpsed among spires, flickers of light, whispers in the stone, and sudden cold spots remain vivid. Observers carry forward impressions of movement, sound, and presence, integrating them into awareness of other natural spaces. The monument leaves a lasting mark, a landscape where scale, shadow, sound, and perception converge to create an experience both breathtaking and haunting, a place where past and present coexist in the textures, echoes, and shapes of rock. Chiricahua National Monument endures as both natural wonder and living archive of memory. Its spires, canyons, ledges, and trails interact with light, shadow, sound, and perception to create an environment that is immersive and attentive. Figures, whispers, and subtle changes converge to engage observation, reflection, and imagination. Visitors encounter a space that is both physical and atmospheric, where rock, wind, and shadow preserve history and presence, leaving a lasting impression of scale, wonder, and the quiet persistence of the unseen. Walnut Canyon National Monument stretches across the high desert, its cliffs carved over millennia by wind and water. Nestled among the sandstone walls are ancient dwellings, built by hands long gone. Yet somehow the canyon retains a sense of presence, as if memory itself lingers among the ruins. The trails wind along narrow ledges, past cliff faces and alcoves. And the air carries the dry scent of stone, dust, and juniper. Even under the sun, the canyon feels suspended in time. A place where every shadow and crevice holds history and quiet awareness. Figures are sometimes seen on the ledges and within the cliff dwellings themselves. Their forms are subtle, blending with the natural rock and ruined walls, appearing briefly before fading into the environment. Observers describe shapes that are human in outline, moving with deliberate, silent purpose along alcoves, walkways, and terraces. Approaching these figures reveals nothing tangible, yet their presence lingers in the mind, leaving a sensation of being observed, of a continuity between past and present that cannot be dismissed. Visitors frequently report hearing whispers drifting along the trails and through the alcoves. The sounds are soft, intermittent, and impossible to locate definitively. Names, conversations, or murmurs of instruction seem to rise from the stone, echoing faintly along cliff walls and among fallen timbers. The whispers are not threatening, yet they create a persistent awareness, guiding attention to corners, ledges, or ruins that might otherwise be overlooked. A faint chill often accompanies the voices, pressing lightly against the skin and amplifying perception. Doors and wooden structures within the dwellings creak as if moved by unseen hands. Hinges groan along thresholds that have long been weathered, producing sounds that echo through the canyon. Footsteps seem to follow visitors along narrow trails, measured and deliberate, yet no one is visible. The effect is subtle but insistent, creating the impression that the canyon itself records movement and responds to those who traverse it. Every step, every glance becomes heightened, the environment alive with history and unseen presence. The dwellings themselves hold particular weight. Stone walls and weathered wood frame small rooms and alcoves, each space resonating with centuries of human activity. Shadows pool in corners and along ledges, elongating as sunlight shifts or fog drifts across the canyon. Observers describe seeing forms standing silently at thresholds, sitting or moving lightly across floors, only to vanish when focused upon. The interaction of light, shadow, and memory produces a layered environment, where perception is sharpened and ordinary expectations of space are suspended. The trails winding through Walnut Canyon amplify the sense of presence. Narrow paths hug cliff edges, moving past dwellings and over terraces carved by ancient hands. Dust and pebbles shift underfoot, each sound echoing faintly across stone surfaces. Figures may appear at turns or ledges, often for only a moment, blending with rock and shadow before disappearing. The Canyona's natural acoustics carry these sounds, blending them with environmental noisesa wind through juniper, rustle of sand, distant bird calsa, creating an immersive soundscape that heightens awareness. Even the cliffs themselves seem to participate in the experience. Sunlight reflects off stone faces, illuminating textures, cracks, and indentations that appear to shift as shadows move. Forms may seem to emerge briefly from the rock, lingering at the edge of vision, only to dissolve when attention is focused directly. The effect is subtle yet persistent, producing the sense that the canyon preserves memory, energy, and the echoes of those who once lived among these walls. Extended exploration intensifies the experience. Every glance at ledges, every movement along narrow trails. Every sound a real or perceivada. Every sound a real or perceivada becomes part of a layered awareness. Visitors report a sensation of being accompanied by the spirits of past residents. Observing or retracing ancient patterns of life. The interplay of shadow, light, and sound creates a space that is immersive and dynamic, where history feels present, and the environment responds to observation and movement. Even brief visits leave lasting impressions. Whispers, footsteps, shadows, and figures persist in memory long after leaving the canyon. Observers recall the shapes of ledges, the textures of stone walls, the echoes of trails, and the sense of unseen attention following them. Across terraces and along paths, dreams often replay the dwellings, alcoves, and movement of forms, reinforcing the perception that Walnut Canyon is more than a landscape. It is a space alive with memory and presence. Walnut Canyon National Monument endures as a place where history, landscape, and subtle energy converge. Its cliff dwellings, ledges, and trails carry echoes of human life long past, while shadows, figures, whispers, and footsteps persist in the present. The canyon exists as more than rock and sand. It is a repository of memory, observation, and presence. To walk its paths, explore its dwellings, and follow its terraces is to enter a realm where ordinary perception is suspended, where the spirits of past residents linger, and where the canyon continues to guard, observe, and endure through time. Tonto National Monument rises from the rugged desert cliffs, its rock shelters and caves etched into the canyon walls over centuries. By day, the sun casts stark shadows across the cliffs, illuminating ancient ruins and worn pathways carved into stone. Visitors admire the remnants of civilizations long gone, marveling at the ingenuity of those who once inhabited these shelters. As dusk falls, however, the landscape shifts. Shadows lengthen, colors fade, and the air carries a weight that is both quiet and perceptible, a reminder that history here is layered with memory and presence. Figures are sometimes seen in shadowed alcoves and along cliff faces. Their forms are faint and indistinct, moving deliberately among the rocks as if performing routines that have persisted for generations. Observers describe them as human in shape but ethereal, appearing for a moment before dissolving into shadow or blending with the contours of stone. Approaching these figures often causes them to vanish, leaving only the suggestion of movement and a heightened awareness of the surrounding space. Whispers drift through the rock shelters and caves, low and faint, carrying sounds of forgotten languages. The voices rise and fall unpredictably, sometimes echoing along narrow corridors and other times drifting through open ledges where the canyon stretches below. Visitors describe the whispers as impossible to locate, yet unmistakable, intertwining with natural sounds of wind and shifting stones. The effect is immersive, as if the ancient walls themselves are replaying fragments of conversation long forgotten. Sudden chills sweep across the cliffs and shelters. The temperature drops unexpectedly in isolated spots, brushing over skin with a concentrated intensity that startles visitors. The sensation follows movement through alcoves and along pathways, creating the impression of an unseen presence moving alongside observers. Every step becomes deliberate, every glance attentive, as the natural environment interacts with subtle phenomena to heighten perception and awareness. Ghostly lights sometimes flicker along the ancient ruins. They appear briefly among stone walls and terraces, glinting and pulsing as if responding to motion or attention. Leaving only darkened stone and the memory of illumination. The effect combines with shadows and whispers to create a layered sense of presence, blending perception, environment, and history into a single, immersive experience. The architecture of the cliff dwellings amplifies the atmosphere. Rock overhangs and narrow passages carry sound in unexpected ways, reflecting whispers, footsteps, and distant echoes. Surfaces of sandstone, worn smooth by centuries of wind and human activity, catch light in patterns that shift as visitors move. Every nook and crevice, every ledge and alcove becomes a point of potential perception, drawing attention to subtle changes in shadow, movement, and sound. Time within Tonto National Monument feels altered. Moments stretch longer than expected. Echoes persist, and shadows linger in corners and along cliff faces. Figures appear and vanish. Whispers rise and fall. Ghostly lights flicker unpredictably. Visitors report a heightened sense of perception. Noticing details that might otherwise be overlooked. And a deepened awareness of the layered history present in every stone and pathway. Even brief encounters leave lasting impressions. Figures glimpsed in alcoves, whispers in forgotten languages. Sudden chills, and flickering lights imprint themselves on memory. Observers describe a persistent awareness of presence. A quiet sense that the monument preserves memory. And interacts subtly with those who enter. Every step along the paths, every pause in a shelter. And every glance toward the cliffs becomes part of the experience. Layering sensation and perception with history. The monument preserves memory and interacts subtly with those who enter. Every step along the paths, every pause in a shelter. And every glance toward the cliffs becomes part of the experience. Layering sensation and perception with history. The monument preserves memory and interacts subtly with those who enter. Every step along the paths, every pause in a shelter. And every glance toward the cliffs becomes part of the experience. Layering sensation and perception with history. The monument preserves memory and interacts subtly with those who enter. Every step along the paths, every pause in a shelter. And every glance toward the cliffs becomes part of the experience. Layering sensation and perception with history. The natural environment reinforces the haunting atmosphere. Wind moves unpredictably through the canyon, rustling stones and carrying faint echoes. Shadows stretch and shift along rock faces and terraces, creating shapes that suggest motion or life. The interplay of light, shadow, and ambient sound produces an immersive environment where perception is heightened and ordinary observation transforms into an encounter with history and presence. Figures along ledges and within shelters move deliberately yet remain elusive. Observers note subtle pacing, pauses, and sudden disappearances. The flickering of lights along ruins and terraces creates moments of visual intrigue, drawing attention to the contours of stone and shadow. Whispers and chills accompany movement, making every step and glance significant and creating a continuous sense of observation that lingers even after leaving the site. Tonto National Monument exists as a space where history, perception, and environment converge. Figures glide silently in alcoves. Sudden chills pass along paths. Ghostly lights flicker among ruins. The cliffs and shelters do not threaten, they preserve memory. Recording moments in subtle, layered ways for those who enter. Observers are drawn into an immersive experience, where attention, awareness, and history intertwine, leaving a lasting impression of presence and perception. At night, Tonto National Monument is most alive. Figures appear among rock shelters and along cliff faces. Whispers drift unpredictably through the caves. Cold drafts sweep along ledges. Lights flicker across terraces and ruins. Shadows stretch, twist, and bend along stone surfaces, blending with natural contours to create ephemeral forms. Visitors leave with impressions that endure. A quiet understanding of history, memory, and unseen presence woven into the landscape. The monument remains a space where past and present coexist, holding stories, observation, and atmosphere for those willing to witness its haunting and enduring beauty. Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument stretches across the Sonoran Desert, a vast expanse of sand, rocky terrain, and towering cacti that rise like sentinels against the night sky. By day, the desert is alive with sunlight and heat, the outlines of saguaro and organ pipe cacti casting long, dramatic shadows. Yet when night falls, the trails take on a different character. Darkness blankets the landscape, and the silence is profound, broken only by the faint whisper of wind or the distant call of nocturnal wildlife. Figures are sometimes glimpsed among the cacti, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Their outlines are indistinct yet human, moving deliberately along trails or between clusters of plants. Observers describe a sensation of being watched, an awareness that extends beyond vision. The figures appear and vanish without warning, leaving travelers with a lingering sense of presence that is both uncanny and compelling. Whispers drift across the desert floor, carried on the cool night breeze. Names are softly called, and fragments of speech or warning echo across the sand. The voices are faint yet unmistakable, often blending with the natural sounds of the desert, making it difficult to discern origin or direction. Observers report a subtle pull toward the source, a sense that the environment itself is engaged in quiet communication, amplifying perception and heightening awareness. The environment itself is engaged in quiet communication, amplifying perception and heightening awareness. Distant drumming occasionally punctuates the stillness, low and rhythmic, resonating across the expanse of desert trails. The sound carries far, echoing off distant rock formations and cacti, producing an immersive auditory experience. Travelers describe a sensation of time stretching, with the rhythm of the drumming blending with the natural cadence of the desert. The beats feel purposeful, as though the desert holds memory and continues to enact rituals of long ago. Cold drafts sweep across the trails, brushing along skin and clothing without visible cause. The temperature shifts suddenly in localized areas, creating the impression that something unseen moves alongside. Observers feel the drafts tracking their movement, following across miles of sand, connecting them to the environment in ways that are both subtle and immediate. The sensation enhances the perception of presence and lends the desert an active, almost sentient quality. The cacti themselves contribute to the atmosphere. Their towering forms cast deep shadows under the moon. Trails that seem familiar by day take on an otherworldly quality at night. Observers often describe a heightened attention to every detail, aware that the landscape is alive with subtle motion and presence. Rock formations and ridges amplify both light and sound. The slightest noisia, a footstep on sand, a shifting branch, or the faint hum of wind, echoes unpredictably, creating auditory illusions that blend with whispers and drumming. The desert floor, though expansive, seems attentive, carrying sound across distances and reflecting movement in ways that create tension and awareness simultaneously. The desert floor, though expansive, seems attentive, carrying sound across distances and reflecting movement in ways that create tension and awareness simultaneously. Time behaves differently along these trails. Moments stretch and compress. Shadows linger longer than expected. And figures reappear in familiar locations. After vanishing, the desert seems to operate on its own rhythm, where perception is altered and memory of events overlaps with present observation. And memory of events overlaps with present observation. Draws attention to even the smallest changes in the environment. Even the open spaces between cacti take on a strange vitality. Moonlight reflects off sand and rocks, creating illusions of movement. Shadows of distant plants stretch and merge, forming shapes that are briefly human before dissolving back into the landscape. The interplay of light, shadow, and space reinforces the impression that the desert is attentive, observing, and subtly interacting with travelers. Visitors often note that auditory and visual phenomena combine to heighten awareness. Figures appear among cacti just as whispers drift across the sand. And faint drumming echoes as cold drafts sweep past. The layering of these elements produces a continuous and immersive experience, drawing travelers deeper into both the environment and the sensation of unseen presence. The desert feels alive with memory and attentive to the passage of those who traverse it. Observers leave the monument with lasting impressions. The glowing figures, whispers, distant drumming, and cold drafts all linger in memory, creating a sense of continuity with the desert's long history. The experience is subtle yet profound, neither threatening nor chaotic, but filled with the quiet power of presence and observation. The desert becomes a space where the past and present coexist, where every movement is acknowledged, and every sound resonates with meaning. The experience is subtle yet profound, neither threatening nor chaotic, but filled with the quiet power of presence and observation. The desert becomes a space where the past and present coexist, where every movement is acknowledged, and every sound resonates with meaning. The experience is subtle yet profound, neither threatening nor chaotic, but filled with the quiet power of presence and observation. The desert becomes a space where the past and present coexist, where every movement is acknowledged, and every sound resonates with meaning. The experience is subtle yet profound, neither threatening nor chaotic, but filled with the quiet power of presence and observation. The desert becomes a space where the past and present coexist, where every movement is acknowledged, and every sound resonates with meaning. The experience is subtle yet profound, neither threatening nor chaotic, but filled with the quiet power of presence and observation. The desert becomes a space where the past and present coexist, where every movement is acknowledged, and every sound resonates with meaning. The experience is subtle yet profound, neither threatening nor chaotic, but filled with the quiet power of presence and observation. The desert becomes a space where the past and present coexist, where every movement is acknowledged, and every sound resonates with meaning. The experience is subtle yet profound, neither threatening nor chaotic, but filled with the quiet power of presence and observation. The desert becomes a space where the past and present coexist, where every movement is acknowledged, and every sound resonates with meaning. The experience is subtle yet profound, neither threatening nor chaotic, but filled with the quiet power of presence and observation. The desert becomes a space where the past and present coexist. Where every movement is acknowledged. And every sound resonates with meaning. The experience is subtle yet profound. Neither threatening nor chaotic. But filled with the quiet power of presence and observation. The desert becomes a space where the past and present coexist. Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument endures as a place where landscape, memory, trails, cacti, rocks, and shadows combine with auditory phenomena to create an atmosphere that is immersive, mysterious, and unforgettable. Visitors experience not only the physical beauty of the desert but also the lingering presence of unseen watchers, a testament to the quiet power and enduring spirit of this extraordinary landscape. Sunset Crater Volcano National Monument rises from the high desert, a landscape shaped by fire, ash, and flowing lava. Jagged rocks stretch across the terrain, ridges and crevices tracing paths of ancient eruptions. The volcanic soil is dark and pitted, contrasting with patches of resilient vegetation that cling to life along trails. By day, the monument draws visitors to hike its paths, marvel at the craters, and explore the dramatic scenery. Yet as light wanes and shadows deepen, the environment takes on a presence that is subtle, almost imperceptible, yet profoundly felt by those who linger. Figures appear near craters and along barren trails, their forms faint against the textured rock. Figures move deliberately, pausing on ridges or among lava flows, sometimes standing motionless as if observing the land and the visitors who traverse it. Approaching them directly causes them to vanish, leaving only the impression of movement and presence. Observers often describe a sense of attention, a quiet awareness that the volcanic landscape itself preserves memory and echoes of those who have walked it before. The wind carries sounds across the monument, blending natural elements with something more elusive. Faint screams drift from the direction of craters or lava ridges, distant yet piercing, merging with the rustle of desert grasses and the whisper of shifting rocks. Footsteps echo softly along trails, measured and deliberate, yet often without source. Visitors report a heightened awareness in response to these sounds, a careful attention to each step, each shadow, each shifting contour of the terrain. Shadows cling to lava flows and ridges, stretching and bending with the movement of the sun and wind. These movements are subtle but continuous, drawing the eye and guiding awareness across ridges, slopes, and the slopes of the volcanic cones. Observers often sense a rhythm in the interplay of shadow and terrain, as though the monument itself participates in an ongoing dialogue of presence and memory. The craters themselves hold particular resonance. Their rims rise sharply against the horizon, casting deep shadows into the interiors below. Figures appear along these edges, standing as if surveying the landscape, gliding along slopes, or pausing in reflection. The craters act as natural stages, amplifying both sight and sound, creating an immersive experience that blends environment and perception. Observers report that the figures seem attuned to those who walk the trails, appearing intermittently as if to mark attention or convey observation. The crater's unique shape and size create an otherworldly atmosphere that amplifies both sight and sound, creating an immersive experience. Footsteps and faint movement often appear among lava rocks and hardened flows. Sounds carry unpredictably, amplified by hollows and fissures, echoing across barren terrain. The combination of jagged rocks, wind, and echoes produces a layered sensory experience, blending the physical and perceptual into a continuous narrative of presence. The wind adds a further layer of perception. Within these natural currents, faint sounds of voices, murmurs, and whispersa are often carried, suggesting names, warnings, or fragments of speech. The effect is subtle but persistent, blending with the environment to heighten awareness and create an immersive sense of connection to the past and the memory embedded in the volcanic landscape. The ground itself seems responsive. Observers occasionally report trembling or vibrations beneath their feet, subtle shifts that correspond with the appearance of figures or the movement of shadows. These sensations reinforce the impression that the land is not inert, but attentive, preserving layers of activity and memory over centuries. Each step through hardened lava flows or along desert trails becomes deliberate, every glance focused, as the landscape communicates both history and presence. Time feels different within Sunset Crater. Moments stretch or compress unexpectedly. Shadows and figures appear and vanish without pattern. And echoes travel irregularly across crags and ridges. Observers experience heightened perception, sensing nuances of light, sound, and movement that are imperceptible elsewhere. The environment engages both the senses and intuition, producing a fully immersive experience that connects past and present. Departing the monument leaves a lasting impression. Figures fade from view. Footsteps disappear. And distant cries carried by wind recede into memory, leaving observers conscious of the layers of history, memory and attention embedded within the landscape. The craters, lava flows, ridges, and desert terrain remain vivid in recollection. A reminder that Sunset Crater is not only a geological formation, but also a space alive with observation and preserved memory. Ultimately, Sunset Crater Volcano National Monument is more than rock and ash. It is an environment where perception, memory, and presence converge. Figures along ridges, shadows among lava flows, faint cries, and subtle tremors create a layered, immersive experience. Each visit becomes an exploration of attention and awareness, leaving observers with a vivid impression of a landscape that continues to remember, observe, and endure across centuries, preserving the echoes of life, motion, and presence long after the eruptions have ceased. Wupatki National Monument rises from the high desert, a vast expanse of sandstone, cinder, and ancient stone ruins. By day, the sun illuminates the remnants of pueblos, casting warm light across crumbling walls, open plazas, and narrow passageways. The landscape is expansive and quiet, punctuated by the distant cries of birds and the whisper of wind through sparse vegetation. The ruins themselves are a testament to centuries of human habitation, skillfully constructed and weathered by time, yet still commanding a presence that transcends their age. Even in daylight, the monument holds an atmosphere that is both awe-inspiring and subtly uncanny, a space where the echoes of the past can almost be felt beneath the soles of the feet. Figures are occasionally glimpsed moving among the stone walls and empty plazas. They appear partially in shadows or in the peripheral vision of visitors, moving with deliberate steps along paths once trodden by inhabitants long gone. Approaching these shapes often yields nothing, leaving only the impression that the land itself preserves fragments of life, motion, and presence. Their appearances are fleeting yet vivid, creating a connection between the modern observer and the long history embedded in each wall, doorway, and courtyard. Visitors report the sensation of ghostly footsteps echoing through the ruins. The sound is subtle, soft, and irregular, tracing along stone floors and through open plazas. Footsteps may follow, recede, or shift direction without visible source, amplifying the feeling that the ruins are alive with memory. Every step taken by a visitor becomes layered with perception of past movement, heightening awareness and drawing attention to the texture of stone, the layout of plazas, and the spaces between walls where shadows linger. Whispers and faint laughter are sometimes heard drifting through empty rooms and open courtyards. The voices are soft and intermittent, carrying tones that suggest joy, conversation, or ritual from centuries past. They seem to move with the observer, appearing in one area and fading in another, blending with natural sounds of wind, birds, and distant desert noises. These auditory cues contribute to the immersive atmosphere, offering a sense of continuity between the present and the lives that once animated the space. Shadows appear to climb walls and vanish into the sky. As sunlight angles through narrow passages or falls across open plazas, some shadows shift independently of the observer or any tangible source. They stretch and curl along stone surfaces, suggesting figures or motion that defy logic. In fading light, these shadows take on an almost tangible quality, moving in ways that provoke attention, curiosity, and a sense of the monument as a space where natural and spectral presence converge. The architecture of the pueblos accentuates perception and atmosphere. Narrow doorways, high walls, and terraced rooms create lines of sight and perspective that shift as the observer moves. Floors of compacted earth and stone resonate subtly with footsteps, amplifying ambient sound and enhancing awareness of space. Alcoves, stairways, and small chambers provide pockets of shadow where figures can be glimpsed or where whispers seem to originate. Each structural element interacts with light, shadow, and sound to create an environment that is layered, complex, and immersive. Light and time transform the monument continuously. Sunrise casts long, angular shadows across the walls and plazas, highlighting textures and contours. Midday sun flattens features and washes color across stone, emphasizing scale but softening perception of depth. Evening light lengthens shadows, merges textures, and introduces subtle gradients across walls and courtyards, creating an environment in which movement, perception, and imagination intertwine. Shadows become fluid, figures emerge at the edge of vision, and auditory cues carry more weight in the stillness of approaching night. Wind and temperature shifts add to the sensation of presence. Gusts pass through open courtyards and narrow passages, carrying with them faint sounds, scents of desert plants, and the movement of dust across stones. Temperature drops unexpectedly in certain areas, brushing against the skin and lending weight to the perception of unseen presence. The natural elements interact with architecture to heighten awareness and reinforce the immersive experience of space, memory, and subtle energy. Time within Wupatki feels altered, particularly as daylight fades. Minutes stretch while observing shadows, listening to whispers, or following glimpses of movement. Hours may pass unnoticed when fully engaged in observation of stone, light, and sound. The rhythm of wind, distant wildlife, and the echo of imagined footsteps merges with the perception of figures and shifting shadows, creating a continuous flow that blends past and present. Every step, glance, and pause contributes to the experience of being fully present in a space where history is palpable. The experience of being fully present in a space where history is palpable. Memory of the monument endures after leaving. Figures glimpsed among walls, shadows that climb surfaces, whispers, and faint laughter remain vivid in recollection. Observers carry these impressions forward, integrating them into perception of other historical or natural spaces. Wupatki National Monument leaves an indelible mark, a landscape where stone, light, shadow, and sound converge to create an experience that is both beautiful and haunting. A space where past lives and present observation meet in silent dialogue. Wupatki endures as both natural and cultural landscape, a repository of memory and presence. Its stone walls, plazas, and terraces interact with light, shadow, sound, and perception to create a fully immersive environment. Figures, whispers, and spectral movement converge to shape awareness and reflection. Visitors encounter not only a physical space but a living archive of history, presence, and subtle energy. Leaving a lasting impression of continuity, observation, and the quiet persistence of the unseen throughout this ancient monument. Havasu Falls cascades dramatically into turquoise pools, carved over millennia within the deep canyons of the Grand Canyon region. By day, the waterfalls are radiant, sunlight glinting across the mist, revealing the natural splendor of cliffs and desert vegetation. Yet when night falls, the atmosphere changes. Shadows gather along the cliffs, the mist thickens, and the roar of water transforms into a conduit for whispers, cries, and the subtle sensation of presence. The canyon seems alive, watching and remembering. Figures are sometimes seen along the cliffs, their outlines blurred in the darkness and mist. They move slowly, appearing briefly at the edges of vision, or stand silently, gazing over the falls. Occasionally, shapes emerge in the falling spray itself, seeming suspended within the mist before dissolving into the night. Approaching these figures rarely reveals anything tangible, leaving visitors with the impression of being observed by presences rooted in the canyona's history. Leaving visitors with the impression of being observed by presences rooted in the canyona's history. Visitors often hear crying carried by the rush of water, faint at first but growing in clarity as one moves along the trail or the pulsa edge. The sound blends with the roar of the falls, yet carries distinct tonal qualities, echoing across the canyon walls. At times, distant screams can be heard, hollow and distant, as though emanating from within the rock or the mist itself. These sounds evoke both sorrow and awareness, heightening the sense that Havasu Falls preserves memory in its environment. The pools beneath the falls are a source of subtle unease. Ghostly travelers have been reported wading through the water, their forms shimmering as they move silently. Their outlines are indistinct, the figures blending with the blue-green water and falling spray. Observers describe feeling a presence that mirrors their movements, a sense that the canyon and the falls themselves are aware of every step taken along the edge of the pools. The water seems to carry history, reflecting light and shadow in ways that suggest motion beyond what is physically present. Mist drifting from the falls moves unnaturally at times, curling across the cliffs and along the canyon floor. Shapes form briefly within the spray, suggesting figures or gestures, then vanish as the wind shifts. The mist acts as both veil and canvas, obscuring paths and revealing forms in unpredictable patterns. Visitors report a heightened sense of awareness, feeling as though each movement, each glance, is recorded by the environment, the canyon amplifying perception with every shift of light and moisture. The cliffs themselves amplify sound, carrying echoes of footsteps, whispers, and the water's roar across long distances. Every footstep on rock, every creak of vegetation, every splash in the pools is amplified and layered with other natural and subtle sounds, producing a rich auditory environment. Even minor noises gain significance, as if the canyon highlights them, making visitors aware of the convergence of nature, presence, and history. As if the canyon highlights them, making visitors aware of the convergence of nature, presence, and history. Shadows play a significant role in perception at Havasu Falls. Moonlight or starlight reflecting off the water and cliffs casts elongated forms across the canyon. These shadows stretch along ledges and across the pools, sometimes suggesting movement where none exists. Observers often notice shapes at the edge of vision, figures that appear to drift with the mist or dissolve into rock and spray. The interplay of light, shadow, and water creates a dynamic and immersive environment that feels alive and aware. Visitors report sudden changes in temperature along trails near the falls. Cool breezes drift unexpectedly across shoulders or necks, intensifying the awareness of shadowy shapes and figures. The sensation is subtle yet persistent, as if the canyon itself interacts with each presence. Combined with the sounds of water, mist, and distant echoes, these shifts in perception heighten every sensory impression, creating an immersive experience, where ordinary boundaries of sight, sound, and touch seem altered. Even brief stays leave lasting impressions. The figures along cliffs and in mist. The crying and distant screams. The ghostly travelers in pools. And the movement of light and shadow persist in memory long after leaving. Observers describe recalling the patterns of spray, the outlines of figures, and the layering of sound and presence in dreams or sudden recollections. The falls imprint themselves, creating a sense of connection to a place that exists both in the physical world and within perception itself. Havasu Falls endures as a space where history, memory, and subtle energy converge. The cliffs, pools, and cascading water carry echoes of presence, while shadows, mist, and sounds interact to create an immersive environment. Figures appear. Cries carry through the canyon. Ghostly travelers move through the pools. And the mist shifts unpredictably, heightening awareness. To walk near the falls is to enter a place where ordinary perception is suspended, where the roar of water and the play of light and shadow reveal layers of history, and where the spirits of the past continue to inhabit the landscape, observing, enduring, and lingering in every ripple and whisper of Havasu Falls. The canyons along the Arizona border stretch in vast, rugged expanses, their cliffs and mesas rising sharply from the desert floor. By day, the canyons are stark and sunlit, the red and ochre rock formations casting long shadows across the valleys below. Winds sweep through narrow gullies, carrying the faint rustle of brush and the distant cry of birds. By night, however, the landscape changes, taking on a heavier presence. Darkness settles into every crevice and canyon floor, and travelers often feel the weight of the land itself, as if the cliffs and ridges hold memories of lives long gone. Figures are occasionally glimpsed walking along cliff paths, their forms faint and almost indistinct against the rock. Observers describe them as human in shape, moving deliberately along narrow ledges or descending into hidden ravines. They pause, turn, and vanish into fog or shadow, leaving the canyon silent once again. Whispers drift through the canyons, low and irregular, carrying old names across ridges and valleys. The voices seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, rising from cliff walls and shifting with the wind. Observers note that the words are faint yet distinct, repeated in patterns that feel deliberate but impossible to follow fully. The whispers amplify the sense of history embedded in the landscape, as if the canyons themselves are recounting fragments of memory to those who listen. Shadowy shapes appear along canyon edges, observing silently. Travelers describe forms that linger at the periphery of vision, outlines that suggest presence without clear detail. These figures sometimes move with the contours of the cliffs, appearing along ridges or near rock formations before fading into darkness. They never approach, yet their observation is palpable, creating an immersive awareness of the landscape as both environment and witness. The terrain enhances the feeling of presence. Narrow paths twist along cliffs. Ledges drop sharply to canyon floors. Rocky outcroppings create deep shadows. Each crevice and recess provides a stage for subtle movement. Where shadows shift, and forms appear fleetingly. Observers note the interplay of light and rock. Where moonlight illuminates ridges and highlights shapes that seem alive. Even a slight gust of wind can carry whispers or shift shadows, reinforcing the sense that the land itself participates in the experience. Cold drafts sweep through the canyons unpredictably. Travelers often report sudden drops in temperature, concentrated along narrow paths or open ledges. The chill brushes against skin, heightening perception and focusing attention on the surroundings. Every step becomes deliberate, every glance measured, as the sensation of unseen presence intertwines with the natural topography. The effect creates an awareness of being watched and remembered in a space that is vast yet intimately connected to human experience. Figures along cliff paths move with purpose yet remain elusive. Observers describe pacing, pauses, and subtle shifts in posture that suggest deliberate action. They appear momentarily in moonlight or shadow, then vanish into rock formations or mist rolling along the ridges. The effect is both captivating and disorienting, drawing attention to the texture of the cliffs, the undulations of the landscape, and the faint movements that occupy the boundary between perception and imagination. Time in the canyonlands feels altered. Moments stretch and contract. Shadows linger longer than expected. Echoes of footsteps and whispers carry across distances that defy ordinary understanding. Figures appear, vanish, and reappear. The repetition of names in whispers gives the sensation of memory being played back across the landscape. Visitors describe a heightened sense of observation, noticing the interplay of light, shadow, and sound with a clarity that is absent in ordinary experience. Even brief encounters leave lasting impressions. Figures glimpsed along cliffs, whispers of old names, shadowy shapes at canyon edges, and sudden chills imprint themselves on memory. Travelers recount a quiet sense of being observed, a weight of unseen presence, and the awareness that the canyonlands preserve fragments of history within their rugged walls. Every step along narrow paths, every pause at a ledge, and every glance across ridges adds to the immersive effect of the experience. Every step along narrow paths, every pause at a ledge, and every glance across ridges adds to the immersive effect of the experience. Every step along narrow paths, every pause at a ledge, and every glance across ridges adds to the immersive effect of the experience. Travelers recount a quiet sense of being observed, a weight of unseen presence, and the awareness that the canyonlands preserve fragments of history within their rugged walls. Every step along narrow paths, every pause at a ledge, and every glance across ridges adds to the immersive effect of the experience. The natural features of the canyonlands reinforce the haunting atmosphere. Cliffs rise sharply, casting shadows that stretch across valleys. Narrow gullies funnel sound, carrying whispers and echoes across long distances. Rocks catch moonlight and create shifting reflections that suggest motion. Fog or mist sometimes rolls along ridges and floors, obscuring paths and shaping perception. Every contour, ledge, and recess contributes to the feeling that the land holds memory, responding subtly to the presence of visitors. The canyonlands exist as a space where history, perception, and environment converge. Figures glide silently along paths. Whispers drift unpredictably across ridges. Sudden chills pass along trails. Shadowy shapes linger at cliff edges. The land does not threaten but observes, preserves memory, and interacts subtly with those who enter. Observers are drawn into an immersive experience, where attention, awareness, and the sense of past lives intertwine, leaving a lasting impression of presence, perception, and layered history. At night, the canyonlands of Arizona are most alive. Figures appear along cliff paths, shadows shift at canyon edges. Whispers of old names rise and fall. And cold drafts sweep along narrow trails. Shapes emerge and vanish in moonlight and fog. Footprints trace paths that may not exist. And the echoes of movement persist long after steps have ended. Travelers leave with impressions that endure. A quiet sense of observation, memory, and unseen presence woven into the rugged landscape. The canyonlands remain a space where past and present coexist, holding stories, shadows, and spectral echoes for those willing to witness their haunting and timeless beauty. Petrified Springs National Park stretches across a landscape of stone and sand, where ancient waters once fed lush vegetation and vibrant wildlife. Today, the springs lie mostly abandoned, their waters still and reflective, bordered by petrified trees that rise like frozen sentinels from the ground. By day, sunlight illuminates the stark beauty of the park, but at dusk and into the night, the atmosphere transforms. Shadows lengthen, the air grows cooler, and the echoes of history seem to awaken among the rocks and trees. Figures are sometimes seen in the water or along the shorelines, pale and indistinct. They move slowly, gliding across the surface or pacing the edges where sand meets water. Observers describe a sense of being watched, as if the spirits of the past still linger, retracing steps or performing rituals long forgotten. Their movements are deliberate yet silent, vanishing the moment attention is focused directly on them. leaving only the memory of presence. Visitors often hear distant splashes, the sound of water breaking the otherwise still surface of the springs. The sound of water breaking the otherwise still surface of the springs. Sometimes, the splashes are accompanied by faint whispers calling names, personal and immediate, resonating in empty spaces. The voices drift across water and sand, creating a layered sense of auditory presence that is both haunting and immersive. Shadows move among the petrified trees, twisting along trunks and through the stony underbrush. Observers describe shapes that appear to advance or retreat, bending and stretching in ways that defy ordinary light. The interplay of moonlight, water, and stone produces fleeting forms that appear alive, heightening awareness and creating the impression that the environment itself is attentive. The petrified forest becomes a stage for subtle, spectral activity that draws every step into sharp focus. The springs themselves hold an unusual energy. Pools reflect moonlight and surrounding petrified trees, creating mirrored surfaces where faint shapes can be glimpsed. Observers often report the feeling of presence near the water's edge, a subtle awareness that extends across both sight and sound. Every ripple, every flicker of movement, is magnified in perception, producing a layered and immersive environment where the boundary between natural phenomenon and unseen presence is uncertain. Footsteps echo along sandy trails, accompanied by the occasional rustle of dry leaves or the shift of stones underfoot. The sound carries farther than expected in the open landscape, blending with the whispers, distant splashes, and the ambient hum of the night. Observing a heightened sense of space, where every sound and movement feels intentional, as though the park itself is aware of every presence within its boundaries. Petrified trees create corridors of shadow and light. Their towering forms block moonlight in some areas while allowing it to spill across other sections, producing shifting patterns along the ground. Figures often appear at the edges of these light patterns, moving silently through corridors of stone and timber. Their presence is subtle yet persistent, leaving observers with a sense of history inhabiting every inch of the park. Time seems altered within petrified springs. Moments stretch and compress unpredictably, shadows linger longer than expected. And shadows linger longer than expected, and shapes reappear in familiar positions after vanishing. And shapes reappear in familiar positions after vanishing. Sounds echo irregularly, with whispers and splashes repeating in patterns that do not correspond to ordinary movement. With whispers and splashes repeating in patterns that do not correspond to ordinary movement. Creating an awareness that is both captivating and disorienting. Even in areas of open water, the spectral presence is perceptible. Figures glide across reflective surfaces or pause at the shore, sometimes seen only peripherally. Ripples spread outward as if responding to their movement, yet no disturbance is visible. The combination of water, shadow, and movement creates a living tableau, where every ripple, whisper, and fleeting form contributes to the overall impression of a landscape alive with memory. Visitors often notice subtle changes in the environment. A ripple in a pool, a shadow shifting among petrified trunks, or a whisper carried on the wind creates an ongoing sense of engagement. Every element of the stone, sand, water, and air appears to interact with observers, producing a multisensory experience, where the ordinary and the extraordinary coexist seamlessly. Petrified Springs National Park leaves a lasting impression. The figures in water and along shorelines. Whispers calling names. Distant splashes. And shadows among the petrified trees. Create an atmosphere that is immersive, mysterious, and unforgettable. The park is not threatening, it is attentive, holding memory and presence. Allowing travelers to experience history and environment in a way that transcends the ordinary. Transcends the ordinary. The park is not threatening, it is attentive, holding memory and presence, allowing travelers to experience history and environment in a way that transcends the ordinary. Petrified Springs endures as a place where nature, history, and perception converge. Waters, petrified trees, shadows, and whispers combine to produce an environment that is layered, immersive, and hauntingly beautiful. Visitors experience the park not only as a physical landscape but also as a space alive with echoes of the past, where memory lingers in every ripple, shadow, and step along the sand. Where memory lingers in every ripple, shadow, and step along the sand. Red Rock State Park stretches across the desert with towering cliffs, deep canyons, and jagged ridges that rise sharply against the sky. By day, sunlight illuminates the red sandstone, casting shadows that highlight the textures of rock and the subtle curves of eroded formations. Trails wind through the landscape, leading past scrub, desert flora, and outcroppings that have endured for millennia. Yet as evening descends, the park transforms, and the same cliffs and canyons that inspire awe take on a quiet, haunting presence. Figures are sometimes seen walking along the ridges at night, moving with deliberate grace. They appear and vanish within moments, their forms faint yet unmistakable against the backdrop of the stone. Observers report that these shapes pause to observe, or drift along paths that seem impossible to navigate, dissolving into shadow when approached. Each appearance carries a sense of awareness, as though the park itself preserves memory of those who have passed across these ridges long ago. Eerie echoes travel through the canyons and cliffs, carrying footsteps, whispers, and faint murmurs that seem both near and distant. The natural resonance of the rock amplifies subtle sounds, transforming them into rhythms that can be heard across long distances. Visitors often notice that the echoes do not align with visible movement, creating a layered auditory experience that blends the ordinary sounds of wind and wildlife with something more ephemeral. The effect is immersive, drawing attention to every footstep, shift of wind, and rustle of leaves. Ghostly lanterns appear in abandoned areas, casting a faint, flickering glow across trails, ledges, and outcrops. They illuminate rocks and vegetation in soft pools of light, revealing details otherwise hidden in darkness. Observers describe a sense of curiosity and caution as the lights appear to beckon or guide, highlighting forms and movement in unexpected ways. The lanterns are never constant, appearing and disappearing without pattern, enhancing the sense that the park is alive with memory and subtle presence. Shadows interact with the environment in strange and captivating ways. Figures emerge briefly from these shadows, standing at the edges of cliffs or gliding across desert flats before fading again. Observers often report a rhythm to these movements, a cadence that feels deliberate and layered, as if the park itself communicates awareness through light and form. Whispers drift through the rocks and canyons, carrying fragments of stories, names, and voices from the past. The sounds appear to come from crevices, ledges, and gaps between formations, creating an impression of proximity without origin. Visitors often pause to listen, sensing narratives embedded in the environment. The effect is both subtle and persistent, blending perception with imagination. And inviting attention to detail in every shadow, rock, and echo. Footsteps echo across the trails and canyon floors, soft yet distinct. Sometimes they follow the observer, other times they seem to precede or occur in places inaccessible to the living. These echoes, layered with natural sounds of wind and wildlife, produce a continuous dialogue between the visitor and the landscape. Each step becomes deliberate, each glance intentional, as awareness is guided by sound, shadow, and presence. The cliffs and ridges themselves hold memory. Rock faces, worn by centuries of erosion, carry impressions of the past. Figures appear near these formations, pausing to look out over the landscape. Or gliding silently along ledges. Observers report that the wind and movement of the terrain can amplify their perception, heightening the sense that the land is alive with history and observation. Time feels altered in Red Rock State Park. Moments stretch and compress as shadows move, figures appear and vanish. Observers become attuned to nuance, noticing the interplay of light, sound, and movement. In ways that feel outside ordinary perception, each experience layers history, memory, and environment, producing a fully immersive awareness of the park as both natural and inhabited by echoes of the past. Departing Red Rock State Park leaves a lasting impression. Figures fade into shadow, footsteps and whispers recede. Ghostly lanterns vanish. Yet the awareness of presence, memory, and movement endures. Observers carry the layered experience of light, sound, and shadow, remembering the park not only as a geological wonder but as a place alive with history and perception. The cliffs, canyons, and ridges preserve the echoes of lives and stories, maintaining a subtle, continuous engagement with all who traverse the landscape. Ultimately, Red Rock State Park is more than sandstone and desert. It is an environment where perception, memory, and presence converge. Figures along ridges, shadows among cliffs, ghostly lanterns, footsteps, and whispered stories create a layered and immersive experience. Each visit becomes an exploration of attention, awareness, and history, leaving observers with a vivid impression of a landscape that remembers, observes, and endures, preserving the echoes of the past long after the sun has set. Saguaro West stretches across the Sonoran Desert, an endless expanse of sand, rock, and towering cacti that rise like sentinels into the night sky. By day, the desert is a study in light and color, golden sunlight casting long shadows across the rugged terrain, the green arms of saguaros reaching toward the horizon. Birds call from hidden perches, and the breeze stirs dry grasses and desert scrub. Yet as the sun sinks below the distant mountains and darkness spreads, the desert transforms. Shadows deepen, shapes stretch into ambiguity, and the landscape takes on an otherworldly presence, both vast and intimate at the same time. Figures are sometimes seen moving among the giant cacti. Approaching them yields nothing, leaving only the impression of presence and motion lingering in the darkness. Their forms are fleeting, ethereal, and human-like, blending with the natural patterns of shadow and light, quietly echoing across sand and stone. Visitors report feeling cold hands brushing against them in the silence. The sensation is sudden and inexplicable, often occurring as they walk alone among the cacti, or pause to observe the desert floor. It is never threatening, but undeniably real, heightening awareness of the environment, and compelling careful attention to every detail. The combination of tactile sensation, shadow, and auditory quietness amplifies perception, creating a sense that the desert is alive with memory and subtle energy. The desert floor itself seems to shift unnaturally underfoot. Sand and rock sometimes feel less solid, a sensation that suggests movement beneath the surface. This effect heightens tension and awareness, drawing attention to texture, light, and shadow, and enhancing the sense that the desert landscape carries a presence that interacts with those who traverse it. Every step becomes deliberate, every pause meaningful, as the observer negotiates both physical terrain and perception of the environment. The saguaros themselves create a living architecture of shadow and form. Their arms reach upward and outward, casting complex, shifting silhouettes across sand and rock. In moonlight, these shapes stretch unnaturally, sometimes resembling figures or motion. The interplay of cactus, shadow, and light transforms familiar objects into a landscape of imagination and perception, encouraging careful observation and reflection. Paths between cacti form natural corridors, framing glimpses of movement, and emphasizing depth, scale, and subtle shifts in presence. Sound is sparse but significant. The faint rustle of night wind, the distant call of nocturnal birds, and the subtle scraping of small animals over sand and stone. Against this backdrop, whispers, movement, or the subtle shift of air across cacti take on an amplified importance. Even the quietest sounds are felt in the chest and across the senses, contributing to a fully immersive awareness of place. Silence is never empty. And every auditory cue reinforces the impression of life, memory, and attentive presence within the desert. Temperature shifts subtly, adding to the experience. Cool breezes sweep along trails or across open spaces, sometimes coinciding with glimpses of figures or subtle motion. These changes heighten perception and create a sense of interaction between observer and environment. The desert at night becomes a space where the physical and perceptual intersect. Every movement, sound, and sensation layered with meaning and resonance. Time behaves differently in Saguaro West. Minutes expand when observing shadows, listening to faint sounds, or feeling shifts beneath the feet. Hours may pass unnoticed as the desert stretches into darkness. Ridges and cacti forming corridors and vantage points that draw attention and sustain focus. The rhythm of wind, temperature, and shadow becomes a framework within which observers move deliberately, attuned to subtle shifts in light, sound, and presence. The night sky completes the landscape. Stars emerge in vast numbers, casting a pale glow across cacti and desert floor. Moonlight accentuates textures and shadows, illuminating trails, rocks, and hidden pockets between giant arms of saguaros. Light and dark converge to produce an environment where perception is heightened and every observation is layered, from shadow and texture to the impression of figures, movement, or presence that may exist at the edge of vision. Memory of Saguaro West persists after leaving. Figures glimpsed between cacti. Cold hands. Shifting desert floor. Whispering wind. Observers carry forward impressions of movement, sound, and subtle presence, integrating them into awareness of other landscapes. The desert leaves an indelible mark, a place where scale, shadow, light, and tactile sensation converge to create an experience both haunting and awe-inspiring, a space where beauty, mystery, and subtle energy coexist. Saguaro West endures as both natural landscape and repository of presence. Its cacti, trails, rocks, and desert floor interact with light, shadow, sound, and perception to create a fully immersive environment. Figures, whispers, and subtle motion converge to shape attention, reflection, and observation. Visitors encounter a space that is alive with memory and energy, a desert where past and present coexist. Leaving a lasting impression of scale, depth, and the quiet persistence of the unseen. Canyon Lake National Park stretches across rugged terrain, its waters shimmering by day. And taking on an otherworldly presence as night falls. The lake lies nestled among cliffs and dense forests, its surface smooth and reflective. Mirroring the stars above and the dark silhouettes of surrounding trees. The scent of pine and damp earth mingles with the subtle aroma of the water itself, creating an environment that feels both serene and alive with unseen energy. Even in daylight, the area carries a sense of history, of lives once intertwined with the land. Yet it is after sunset that the park's haunted qualities emerge. At night, ghostly reflections appear along the lakeside. Visitors often describe seeing forms in the water that move independently of wind or current. Subtle figures that resemble humans or shadows gliding just beneath the surface. Their outlines are indistinct, yet they convey motion and presence, a reminder that the lake itself retains memory of those who have been here before. Approaching the water reveals nothing tangible, yet the impression of observation and quiet awareness lingers long after footsteps leave the shore. Figures are sometimes glimpsed along the water's edge, standing or walking slowly among reeds and rocks. They are often fleeting, appearing at the corner of vision and vanishing when focused upon directly. Observers report that these forms seem to drift between the boundary of land and water, appearing to wade along the shore or pause near stone outcrops before dissolving into shadow. Their presence is subtle but persistent, creating a quiet tension that heightens attention to every sound, reflection, and movement along the lake. Creating a quiet tension that heightens attention to every sound, reflection, and movement along the lake. Abandoned cabins dot the forested areas and small inlets. Their wood is weathered, roofs sagged, and windows darkened with age. From within these structures, faint laughter and whispers sometimes drift outward, echoing across trails and along the water. The voices are soft and intermittent, carrying phrases that are impossible to decipher, yet they resonate with a sense of life and history long gone. Observers describe chills and a tightening of awareness as the sounds rise and fade, lending a haunting rhythm to the night. Lending a haunting rhythm to the night. Spectral lights are occasionally seen hovering over the water. Small glows drift just above the surface, moving unpredictably with the wind or current. They shift and pulse, sometimes in clusters, sometimes solitary, giving the impression of distant campfires or lanterns that are not there. Observers often report being drawn toward these lights, their movement guiding attention along the shoreline or across the lake, yet no physical source is ever found. The phenomenon adds to the immersive sense that the park exists as a space layered with memory and presence. The lake itself amplifies sound and shadow. Gentle lapping of water against stones carries farther at night, echoing softly across the cove. Wind through trees mixes with rustling leaves and the creak of aged timber, producing a subtle, layered soundtrack that heightens perception. Even faint footsteps on trails or near cabins are amplified, creating the impression that movement is accompanied or observed by invisible companions. Shadows cast by moonlight on water and forest blend with the natural landscape, forming shapes that appear briefly as figures or gestures before dissolving back into darkness. Trails winding along the shore and through forested areas produce an immersive environment. Every step across stones, gravel, or roots is amplified in the quiet night air. Shapes and reflections along these paths often appear to shift as the observer moves, creating a sensation that the terrain itself is aware of movement. Observers report heightened perception, noticing details of stone, wood, and water that are otherwise easy to overlook, and feeling a subtle sense of being guided or accompanied along their route. Even brief exposure leaves lasting impressions. The ghostly reflections, the figures at the water's edge. The whispers and laughter from abandoned cabins. And the spectral lights are carried in memory long after leaving. Visitors describe dreams or recollections in which the shapes, sounds, and movements replay, reinforcing the perception that Canyon Lake National Park is inhabited by echoes of those who once traveled its trails, fished along its shores, or gathered near its waters. Every visitor leaves with a lingering awareness of presence, history, and observation. Canyon Lake National Park endures as a place where nature, memory, and subtle energy converge. Its waters, forests, trails, and cabins carry layers of presence. While ghostly reflections, drifting figures, whispered voices, and spectral lights continue to inhabit the landscape. To walk along its shores, explore its paths, and observe its shadows is to enter a realm where ordinary perception is suspended. Where the past is present, and where every ripple, flicker, and whisper serves as a reminder that the park watches, remembers, and endures through time. White Tank Mountain Regional Park rises from the desert landscape with rugged cliffs, deep canyons, and arid expanses stretching in every direction. By day, the sun illuminates red and ochre rock, highlighting jagged ridges and narrow trails carved by wind and water over centuries. Birds circle above, and the quiet of the desert is punctuated by distant animal calls. As evening falls, however, the park takes on a different character. Shadows stretch across canyon floors and cliff faces, and a sense of presence settles over the land, subtle yet unmistakable. Figures are sometimes glimpsed in the shadows along cliffs and canyons. Observers describe human-like forms moving deliberately, pausing at ledges or along narrow trails. They appear faint and ethereal, gliding silently across ridges or disappearing behind rock outcroppings. Approaching these forms often causes them to vanish into darkness or blend with the contours of the desert, leaving only the sensation of movement and a heightened awareness of surroundings. Distant cries and footsteps are often heard where none should exist. The sounds are irregular, sometimes echoing from canyon walls or across desert floors. Observers report that the cries carry emotion, a haunting resonance that draws attention to the vast emptiness of the park. Footsteps follow paths that appear untraveled, moving in sync with ridges and ledges. The effect is subtle yet compelling, creating the impression that the desert itself preserves memory and presence across space and time. Apparitions have been seen climbing ridges silently. Figures ascend rock faces and slopes with careful, deliberate motion, their forms faint against the backdrop of stone and sky. They move without sound, leaving no disturbance of sand or rock, and vanish without warning when observed directly. Witnesses describe the experience as disorienting yet vivid, a glimpse of something beyond ordinary perception. As though the park holds the echoes of lives that once moved through its canyons and cliffs. Lanterns sometimes flicker along trails and ridges where no one walks. Their glow illuminates rock faces and crevices, casting long, dancing shadows across the desert floor. Observers note that the light pulses unpredictably, brightening near movement and dimming without reason. The flickering enhances the sense of life within the stillness, drawing attention to the contours of cliffs, the depth of canyons, and the shifting interplay of shadow and illumination. The natural features of the park amplify these phenomena. Cliffs rise steeply, casting deep shadows along canyon floors. Rock overhangs create recesses where figures or shapes can appear and vanish. Narrow trails guide perception, leading the eye to ridges and ledges where movement seems concentrated. Even the wind participates, carrying distant echoes, shifting sand, and rustling brush that interact with light and shadow to enhance the perception of presence. Sudden chills sweep through the desert unexpectedly. Visitors report brief drops in temperature along trails, often coinciding with glimpses of figures or flickering light. The sensation heightens awareness, making each step deliberate, and each glance purposeful. It adds a tactile dimension to visual and auditory perception, reinforcing the immersive experience of being observed in a space both vast and intimate. Time within White Tank Mountain Regional Park seems altered at night. Moments stretch, echoes linger, and shadows shift unpredictably. Figures appear along ridges and trails, disappear behind rock faces, and reappear in patterns that feel intentional yet impossible to follow. Cries, footsteps, and flickering lights interact with the natural rhythm of the desert, creating an environment where perception is sharpened. An ordinary observation transforms into a heightened awareness of space and presence. Even brief encounters leave lasting impressions. Figures in shadow, distant footsteps, ghostly cries, and flickering lanterns imprint themselves on memory. Observers describe a persistent awareness of unseen presence, a sense that the park preserves memory within its cliffs and canyons. Every glance, pause, and step contributes to the experience, layering perception and sensation with the natural beauty and ruggedness of the landscape. The interplay of shadow, light, and terrain produces a layered environment. Cliffs and ridges create natural frames where figures appear and vanish. Canyons echo sounds across vast distances, enhancing whispers, cries, and footsteps. Lanterns illuminate rock faces, creating shapes that shift and bend with perspective. Every element from the rustle of brush to the angle of moonlight contributes to the immersive sense that the desert holds memory and presence for those who enter. White Tank Mountain Regional Park exists as a space where history, perception, and environment converge. Figures glide silently among ridges and canyons, whispers and footsteps echo along trails, lanterns flicker without source, and chills sweep across desert floors. The park does not pursue or threaten but preserves memory, interacting subtly with those who explore its vast expanse. Visitors experience an environment where attention, awareness, and perception are drawn to every detail of the landscape, leaving a lasting impression of presence and observation. Leaving a lasting impression of presence and observation. At night, the park is most alive. Figures move along cliff paths. Apparitions ascend ridges silently. Cries echo through canyons. Lanterns flicker along untraveled trails. Shadows twist and stretch across the desert floor. Cold drafts sweep along ridges. Every sound and movement is heightened. Travelers leave with impressions that endure. A quiet awareness of unseen presence. The feeling that memory and observation are woven into every cliff, canyon, and desert path of White Tank Mountain Regional Park. Red Cliffs Desert Reserve stretches across miles of arid land, its towering red rock formations rising dramatically against the horizon. Trails wind through the canyons and cliffs, carved over millennia by wind and water, creating paths both beautiful and remote. By day, hikers traverse these routes, taking in the vibrant hues of sandstone and the vast expanse of desert. Yet as twilight approaches, the reserve transforms, shadows lengthen, and a quiet presence seems to settle over the trails, lending the landscape an almost palpable weight. Figures are sometimes seen among the rock formations, drifting along paths or pausing near ledges. Their outlines are indistinct, blending with the natural colors of stone, yet unmistakably human. Observers describe movements that are deliberate and calm, pacing slowly as if retracing ancient journeys. These spectral travelers appear briefly before disappearing into shadows, leaving a lingering sense of observation and quiet activity that persists long after they vanish. Visitors often experience sudden chills along the trails, a cool brush of air that seems to follow them across open stretches and narrow canyons. The sensation is abrupt and localized, heightening awareness of surroundings and reinforcing the impression that the desert is attentive. Every footstep, shift of wind, and distant sound becomes magnified, producing a heightened sense of presence within the landscape. Whispers drift through the air, faint and indistinct, sometimes calling names or issuing warnings. The voices are not loud, but they carry with clarity across open spaces, blending with the natural sounds of rustling sand, shifting rocks, and distant wildlife. Observers describe the effect as immersive, producing a subtle tension that draws attention to every detail, every shadow, and every movement along the trails. The voices are not loud, but they carry with clarity across open spaces, blending with the natural sounds of rustling sand, shifting rocks, and distant wildlife. Observers describe the effect as immersive, producing a subtle tension that draws attention to every detail, every shadow, and every movement along the trails. Observers describe the effect as immersive, producing a subtle tension that draws attention to every detail, every shadow, and every movement along the trails. The whispers drift through the air, faint and indistinct, sometimes calling names or issuing warnings. The whispers drift through the air, faint and indistinct, sometimes calling names or issuing warnings. The voices are not loud, but they carry with clarity across open spaces, blending with the natural sounds of rustling sand, shifting rocks, and distant wildlife. Observers describe the effect as immersive, producing a subtle tension that draws attention to every detail, every shadow, and every movement along the trails. Cliffs and ridges create dramatic vantage points, casting long shadows that stretch across canyons and valleys. The play of light and shadow in the late afternoon produces shapes that appear to move independently, sometimes forming the outlines of figures pacing along ledges. Observers describe the effect as fleeting yet undeniable, the combination of natural formation and subtle motion creating a layered perception of activity and presence. The trails themselves amplify sound in unusual ways. Footsteps echo off stone walls. Distant rocks shift with minor landslides. And the faint movement of wildlife resonates in patterns that are difficult to locate. Observers report a heightened awareness, sensing presence across both visual and auditory fields. Figures are occasionally glimpsed pacing along cliffs at twilight. Their movements are methodical, following paths that align with natural formations, yet they seem separate from the living. Observers often notice them at the edges of perception, vanishing when approached directly, reinforcing the sense that the desert preserves memory and repeats patterns from the past. The spectral travelers blend with the environment, creating an experience that is both haunting and compelling. The interplay of light, shadow, and space is particularly striking in narrow canyons and under overhangs. Sunlight filtering through crevices illuminates dust and sand particles, revealing fleeting outlines that vanish with the shifting angle of light. Shadows twist and fold across walls, occasionally producing forms that resemble human figures or movement. Observers describe a heightened sensitivity to every visual cue, with perception drawn into subtle details that might otherwise go unnoticed. Time seems altered along the desert trails. Moments stretch and contract unpredictably, shadows linger longer than expected. And shadows linger longer than expected, and sounds repeat in ways that feel patterned rather than random. Sounds repeat in ways that feel patterned rather than random. Figures reappear at familiar ledges, whispers echo along the same path. Whispers echo along the same path, and chills brush across skin in intervals that suggest awareness rather than chance. Chills brush across skin in intervals that suggest awareness rather than chance. Observers report a deep immersion, as if stepping into a space where the past and present coexist. As if stepping into a space where the past and present coexist. Even the open stretches of desert convey a sense of attention. The wind carries distant whispers, the movement of sand and rocks produces subtle patterns. Spectral forms appear on distant ridges or along trails. Observers describe a sensation of being accompanied, a quiet awareness of entities sharing the landscape. The experience is subtle, immersive, and memorable, blending natural beauty with the impression of lingering presence. Visitors leave Red Cliff's desert reserve with vivid impressions of both landscape and memory. The figures among rock formations. The whispers across trails. The sudden chills. The pacing silhouettes along cliffs. Create a layered and unforgettable experience. The desert is not threatening. Yet it is alive with history and attentive presence. Reminding every traveler that the land retains memory and quietly observes those who enter. Red Cliff's Desert Reserve endures as a space where environment, history, and perception converge. Desert trails, towering cliffs, shadows, and spectral figures combine to create an atmosphere that is immersive, mysterious, and unforgettable. Visitors experience not only the stunning natural beauty of the reserve but also the subtle, lingering presence of unseen travelers, a testament to the enduring spirit and memory embedded in the desert landscape. The Grand Canyon North Rim in Arizona stretches vast and silent, its cliffs rising sharply above the winding Colorado River far below. Sunlight highlights the reds and golds of layered rock, casting shadows across the ridges and ledges. Trails wind through forests and desert scrub, disappearing along cliff edges where the land falls away into dizzying depths. By day, the canyon feels monumental and timeless, a landscape shaped over millennia. Yet as night falls, the same cliffs take on a presence that is subtle, uncanny, and impossible to ignore. Figures are sometimes glimpsed standing on ledges and overlooked points, their outlines faint against the moonlit rock. They move slowly, observing the canyon below or along trails that vanish into shadow. Visitors report that these forms disappear when approached, leaving only the impression of motion and attention. The presence is quiet, almost solemn, as though the canyon itself preserves memory of those who have walked its heights. Silently witnessing the passage of time. Whispers drift across the canyons, carried on the night wind. They are soft and indistinct, echoing along walls of stone and recesses between ridges. Names, fragments of conversation, and gentle murmurs seem to rise from the canyon itself. Visitors often pause to listen, sensing patterns in the echoes and feeling an awareness of layers of memory embedded within the cliffs. The canyon transforms into a space where sound and perception interact, blending natural acoustics with something more ephemeral. Trails that lead away from the main overlooks often reveal ghostly travelers. Figures move silently along paths that see little use, their passage marked only by fleeting shadows and a sense of presence. Observes describe a rhythm to the movement, deliberate and unhurried, as though the canyon itself guides attention along these remote routes. Shadows and rock formations amplify the perception of motion, creating the impression of life and memory within a vast and otherwise empty landscape. The cliffs themselves carry history. Layers of rock, etched by wind and water, form patterns that catch light and shadow in shifting ways. Figures appear near crevices and ledges, sometimes moving along rock faces with ease that seems impossible. Layers of rock, etched by wind and water, form patterns that catch light and shadow in shifting ways. Visitors report heightened awareness as they walk trails or pause at overlooked points, attuned to every subtle movement, every shifting contour of stone. Shadows elongate and bend in ways that defy expectation, suggesting shapes that are at once natural and animate. Visitors report heightened awareness as they walk trails or pause at overlooked points, attuned to every subtle movement, every shifting contour of stone. Visitors report heightened awareness as they walk trails or pause at overlooked points, attuned to every subtle movement, every shifting contour of stone. Footsteps echo across stone and gravel, appearing to follow visitors or arise from empty ridges. The sound carries unusually far in the canyon, bouncing along cliffs and across ravines. The sound creates a dialogue between perception and environment, creating a captivating and disorienting effect. Each step becomes deliberate, every glance intentional, as the canyon engages attention through sound, shadow, and movement. The interplay of moonlight and shadows amplifies the atmosphere. Light casts long, shifting patterns across rock faces, ridges, and canyon floors. Figures and shadows appear within these patterns, moving or standing still, blending with the natural geometry of the cliffs. Observers often notice the shapes only in peripheral vision, vanishing when directly focused upon, creating a sense of fleeting presence that lingers in memory. Wind carries more than sound. It stirs dust, rattles vegetation, and sweeps through crevices, sometimes amplifying whispers or faint cries. The movement of air across the canyon can suggest motion, brushing along the edges of trails and ridges in ways that enhance perception. Visitors report that even the sensation of wind against skin can feel purposeful, as if guiding attention toward figures, shadows, or distant echoes. Time feels altered on the north rim. Moments stretch and compress as shadows shift. Echoes carry unpredictably. Figures appear and vanish without pattern. Observers often feel suspended in perception, aware of subtle cues that would be unnoticed elsewhere. Light, sound, shadow, and sensation combine to create a fully immersive environment, engaging both sight and intuition. Every observation reinforces the impression that the canyon is alive with memory and attention. Departing the Grand Canyon North Rim leaves a lasting impression. Figures fade into darkness, whispers recede, and footsteps vanish across ridges and trails. Yet the experience remains vivid, the memory of presence, shadow, and sound lingering long after the visitor has left. Observers carry with them the awareness that the canyon continues to preserve echoes, silently observing, reflecting, and maintaining continuity across centuries. Ultimately, the Grand Canyon North Rim is more than cliffs and canyons. It is a space where memory, perception, and presence converge. Figures on ledges, shadows along trails, ghostly travelers, and whispers carried by wind create a layered, immersive experience. Each visit becomes an exploration of attention, awareness, and history, leaving a lasting impression of a landscape that remembers, observes, and endures, preserving the echoes of those who have walked it long after they have passed. Thank you for exploring the haunted national parks of Arizona with me tonight. The landscapes may appear serene during the day, but at night, these parks hold the memories of tragedy and restless spirits. Some visitors leave frightened, some haunted, and some never return. If you ever find yourself hiking or camping in these parks after dark, remember these tales. Step carefully, listen closely, and ask yourself, would you dare walk among the shadows of the past, or would you retreat to safety while you still can? Rest well, my friend, until our next haunted journey.